Hello, good morning, everyone. So if I can ask my fellow panelists to come on up and join me on the virtual stage. Very good. Almost got a full quorum. There we go. Fantastic. Okay, so welcome, everyone. Great to have you join us today for this panel session, supported by our friends at MadeTech. So we had a lot of questions, as we tend to do, from the audience in advance. So I'll do my best to get to as many of them as I can. But of course, if any of you in the audience have questions which arise out of what you've heard from the panel, please do use the Q&A function in Zoom. So Philippa, Alexander, Thomas, David, great to have you join us today, and really excited to dig into this a little deeper, having heard your presentations just now. If you could maybe just start off by introducing yourselves to the audience and give some thoughts on, I suppose, your take on digital services and government in terms of where we've come from, where we think we are now, and perhaps most interestingly, where we're headed. This can either be from the perspective of your organisation or perhaps more generally across government. So David, obviously this is one of the things that you oversaw in your time at Westminster and then Essex. Perhaps you can help us get the ball rolling.
Yeah, and I'll throw a blast from the past for one of the policy person guilty for BVPI 157, if anyone remembers that, from 1998, I think it was.
No, you're showing age now, David. But
really don't want to, I tell you. So as I say, many years as a CIO and a long time sort of proponent of moving to infrastructure free, which became cloud, and so on and so on. And saw life through from open.gov.uk through to UK Online, through to DirectGov, through to where we are today, which is good old-fashioned .gov.uk. Why stick all those other words in the way? You kind of makes you wonder. So I think around that almost in a nutshell encapsulates the history that we've been through in UK government, where we've probably spent the best part of 10 years trying to sort out in our heads what we wanted government to look like. Then we spent another 10 years asking the public. Maybe we should have done that the other way around, but hey, we're now doing it the right way around, I feel, these days. And I think where we are now, I think, is we're almost at a new point around. It's not just about digital, it's about public engagement in the broadest sense. And a lot of the work that I'm now involved in with local government and with health is more about conversations about reimagining front doors, and actually pulling together all of the ways in which we engage with the public, and I think tackling that really difficult challenge around how we move away from institutional thinking. It isn't about central government, NHS, local government, and what have you. And I think looking forward, how do we turn that rhetoric into real practice? And from the tech side, the bit that's really exciting me at the moment, I think, is the maturing of API and low code to really kind of accelerate that kind of multi-platform work, which again I think remains a real blocker. And also I think the end of the steel towers that we built around our networks and our data centers, and they're finally crumbling. So I'll shut up now.
We'll shut up now, but come back again a little bit later. But Philippa, if I can pick on you next. So I mean, what's your sense of Passport Office relative to sort of your peer sort of agencies in central government in particular, in terms of what you've been able to achieve and sort of where you're headed next?
Yes, I mean, I suppose in many ways we are a simple organisation with a single product, and you could say a fairly standard journey when it comes to government services. But when I think about the problems that we've had to solve along the way and the challenges that we've had, I think they could apply equally to organisations and services of any scale, really. And in fact, we have quite a significant challenge coming next ourselves with the transformation of civil registration, which no doubt will be will follow. We will have similar challenges and will follow a similar path.
Thomas, if I can bring you in, so if you could just introduce yourself again for the benefit of people who've just tuned into the panel session. But also give your sense, looking across sort of government from your external sort of friendly partner perspective. What's your take on sort of the trajectory that government's been on and its future direction of travel?
Thanks, James. So I'm market principal for MadeTech in London and the Southeast. I'm responsible for digital services that we provide to public sector partners and organizations. Well, I think what we're seeing is what I've seen over the time is a really increasing involvement of a wider range of service providers, all different sizes, all can bring so many different things to the party. I was really interested in Alexander's talk around, inviting people to come up with exploratory ideas. And you can see when Philippa is talking about the journey that they've gone through, you're bringing in all kinds of different perspectives and skill sets. And now that pool of people who can be invited to take part is getting bigger. And that, I think, increases the quality of the solutions that we produce. It involves a wider range of ideas and minds. And I think we're going to see more of that. Another point, I think, is around this point around David's comment, and people don't think of public sector services just as these monolithic organizations. They see them very much as one big thing. The move towards a service and product oriented view is meaning that we are having to think about everything from the outside in, and that's then rethinking how organizations see each other and work together.
If we can bring in Alexander now, so obviously you're in a privileged position that you are more actively in touch with sort of quite an international ecosystem of both government enablers, but also the provider community, which I find fascinating. What's your sense of where Scotland, if not UK as a whole, sits on that continuum as to sort of the evolution of digital services relative to other jurisdictions?
Sure, and thank you. So I think there's two key trends that are happening, and they are new, but they are growing. And the first is diversity. So diversity of input, and that is, if you think about our own teams, certainly what we encourage from growth of our companies to solve the challenges, a diverse team produces better products. Magnify that across any delivery of any service, and you're going to get a better product. Coupled with that, and this is what we're seeing with our refreshed digital strategy. So we are currently consulting on the new Scottish digital strategy. But key to that was a collaboration, and it was a collaboration between central government and local government. So ensuring that you had key providers of services absolutely bought into the same vision. Because if you don't, then what that creates is tensions in how services deliver. And fundamentally, us as citizens don't give a monkeys about which is the organization behind it. What we care about is what is the experience in achieving the outcome we're trying to get to. So diversity and collaboration. And then underpinning that are the new technologies coming through. I mean, I'm sure everyone's talked about AI or average intelligence, as I often refer to it, given some of the submissions we get. But underpinning, how you can move into much more kind of predictive provision of services.
Yeah, I think you just nailed two of the things that I wanted to come to. So that will be my nice neat segue. We had a great anecdote yesterday from Martin Kevitz, who's the National Digital Advisor in Estonia. And he was talking about how they spent a lot of effort creating this service to provide various sort of Estonian citizen perks to Olympic medal winners, which may surprise you. There's not that many in Estonia. So I think this digital service was created for essentially 13 people. So I mean, he cited that sort of knowingly as an example of solving the wrong kind of problem. And I'm just keen to sort of get your takes on sort of how do we ensure that we're solving the right problems. And obviously the answer that I think you've variously alluded to is ensuring that we are sufficiently diverse in both ourselves as teams, but also the perspective we're bringing from the citizens and the residents we're serving. So perhaps Philippa, if I can pick on you and ask you to sort of just input a little bit into that issue about sort of diversity of inputs.
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a number of areas where we were in serious danger of solving the big problem, but not necessarily the right problem. And probably one of the best examples of that is with photographs for passports, whereby we could, and we probably will, continue to improve the tools and the guidance and the standards and all of the things that we need to do. But until we actually introduce them, diversity of thinking and included beyond the public sector and actually beyond the core user group. So thinking across into the photo industry and looking internationally enabled us to get to a point where, you know, we're never going to solve that problem ourselves. We're not the experts. So we reach into the industries that are the experts and let them solve the problems for us. I think increasingly that diversity that we're talking about here needs to go beyond the public sector. And that's one of the hardest things for us to do.
If I can bring you, David, into this now. So sort of following on from Philippa's comments.
Yeah, and certainly an area I've been and am heavily engaged with a number of organisations at the moment is independent living. It absolutely brings to life your point, Philippa, where, you know, there are two ways we can look at supported living, independent living for the population. Very, very hot topic right now, really doubled down by the whole COVID tragedy that's been going on. And the focus has been entirely on taxpayer funded people. 2/3 of that market is self-funded. Yeah, and we're talking tens of billions, you know, that go through this ecosystem. And our focus has always been on how do we minimize the cost to the taxpayer rather than what's best for the person. Now, what's wrong with that statement? Where do we begin, right? It's kind of on that piece. So you have a market 3 times bigger than the taxpayers' funding that is focused on how we spend less taxpayers' money on it, rather than actually how can those people have a better quality of life at lower cost in a way they choose. And 3/4 of the ecosystem there is private sector. So to make that a success, it needs the tech companies that provide the stuff that go in the houses to work. It needs people like Microsoft, people like Sky involved in the mix, because a massive element of that is connectivity and is communication. And again, as we've seen with COVID, you know, the power of video conferencing for older people, and guess what, they can use it. Wow. You know, it's not rocket science, you know, on enabling this stuff. You take those as tangible examples. Single biggest problem in public sector at the moment is how to resolve supporting adult social care cost. We know that, and funding, and yet the answers in our industry, in our sector, and in digital are there if we engage across all sectors.
So Alexander, bringing you back, since you got us rolling on this, so tell us a little bit more about, I suppose, the progress that you've seen through both your program, but sort of more broadly in the Scottish public sector, of sort of improving how you understand user needs and ensuring that you're not providing a service for Scottish Olympians, of which I'm sure there's a lot more than in Estonia, but still.
Oh, well, I'll have to do my research on that one, and pull out that stat for the next video. But we, about 5 years ago, in parallel, but also within the Digital Directorate, set up a Scottish approach to service design. So there's a real recognition that, you know, improving services, you had to put a framework around it of real design and really kind of thinking through and you know, again, this real collaboration of how you delivered a service. So that led on to the creation of the Chief Design Officer within Scottish Government, or Office of the Chief Designer, and OCD, as it was sort of playfully referred to. But that has put in motion an absolute commitment to obviously putting users at the heart of it, but having a really supporting that whole community of practice around service design. And so you now see, particularly with the rollout of big programs looking at social security, looking at you know, a vast array of delivery of services, whether they're kind of environmental and or health, but that whole focusing on that talent and community practice in order that we deliver better services. And what that's meant is that if you look at some of the feedback and the stats around user uptake, cost of service delivery, and fulfillment, you know, those stats are going in the right direction. But I think there's a key thing. Why I'm such a fan of agile methodology is that if you think about our lives, or at points in our lives, we don't just, go out and have a conversation with someone, a friend of ours, and then come back in a year to check how they're doing. Well, we might physically, but actually it's all about continual data points. It's all about going back to those feedback loops. And it comes back to this: is a service ever truly finished? No. And what we've seen in government is this shift from program methodology, where it's clearly a beginning, middle, and end, to a service where it is ongoing and constantly evolving and improving. And that's a different mentality. But that's the key to always improving. And this whole notion of feedbacks, none of which is rocket science, has been around for years, but adopting that is the key to us delivering better services.
So is that sort of pivot to sort of this iterative continuous improvement, is that sort of out of sync with, I suppose, the policy making progress? I mean, there's a tension there, isn't there? So how do we resolve that?
Very good point. So, then how do you adopt service design principles for policy, and how do you do policy as a service? And that continue, and that's why I come back to the consultation is not collaboration. And therefore, with the challenge for policymakers, if you think about GDS or Digital Directorate, we're delivery arm. We're delivery arm of government. We might obviously have an influence on policy. We might set some of the policies, but within government is generally policy making. And it's getting that mentality back into how you make policy. So that continual, you're not just setting a policy for 10 years. It's, well, what is the data point? How do we improve that? Now, of course, that has tensions politically, because an improvement might be seen as a U-turn. And so, but actually you've got to think, what is it we're trying to do? Is it achievement of an outcome or an achievement of an output?
If I can bring you, Philippa, just to sort of touch upon that point. I mean, so there's this tension, which obviously we've been talking about, between moving to a more agile, fast, iterative approach with that feedback loop, but obviously the expectations of policymakers. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I was chuckling to myself there, and wanted to add to Alexander's point, saying, and investment decisions, because that's something that we all struggle with, the mismatch between the way we want to do good delivery and design, deliver, and provide good services, and the way we spend government money. And we need to do something about that, I think. But in terms of the way we're doing things currently, I think what's really important is to establish good leadership at all levels. And by that, sometimes leadership is going to emerge, and we've had a lot of success with career change and people that have simply had the aptitude to be able to adapt to new ways of working and a new environment. But sometimes we also have to accept that we don't have all of the capability and competence in-house, and we have to bring in fresh talent or partners to help us. And creating the conditions is really my role, and providing the clarity of what we're trying to achieve, and then making sure we've got the competence and capabilities in the teams is really the starting point. And then I think in many ways what we have to do, and what we have done with some success over the years, is just get on with it and prove that this way of working actually does deliver results. Takes a little bit of courage, takes a little bit of bravery, but we're all doing it now. And so sometimes you need to prove it.
Just to give me, if I can comment on Philip's point there, often we talk about the entrepreneurial mindsets coming into governments. That's shifting people from a place of value extraction to one of value creation. But the entrepreneurial mindset is kind of almost three characteristics, and it's one, the perseverance to move forward, the resilience to take the flak, and the urgency to get results. And it's that final piece of, let's get a small result to lead to a bigger result, as the US say, you know, demos, not memos, and you know, and we you know, and it's that mindset which often comes from out with conventional civil service territory, which is why it comes back to the point about diversity. And as Philippa was saying, there is knowing when to bring in skills out with the government on a temporary or a service contract basis, but when to attract those people right into the organization. So you move from capability and capacity to that of a culture, which is one of fast delivery, continuous improvement.
And if I can add a point there,
please, Thomas, come in. Yeah.
We start with lots of assumptions in any project around what we think will be important to that project and what we think will be important to us as an organization. I'm talking about a public sector organization. And then when we begin doing work, well, we often encounter things that challenge those assumptions, and challenging assumptions held strongly within areas of an organization can be very difficult to deal with. It can be very difficult to challenge maybe the assumptions around a particular feature, like Philippa taking a photograph at home in order to get a good passport picture. The assumptions about whether that would be feasible or not. Evidence would then reveal whether it's feasible and then inform future decision making. But there might also be policy decisions being made all the way up in highest levels of government. If teams are given an environment where they can engage with people in forming policy decisions and show them what digital technologies can mean in terms of how policy can be formed. Even simple things like methods of payment. I worked on digital services in government where policy required the acceptance of checks. You know, this is something we need to move away from, I think, for all kinds of reasons, but it just wasn't obvious what that would mean. Does that mean that the digital service has to accommodate checks? Or does it mean we can talk about whether that policy is required and whether there's a new way of forming it? So there's this need to make a relationship between different groups of people who have strongly held assumptions about what the output should be and how the work should be done. And then by constantly coming up with clear evidence, by building real things and showing real things, not memos, then you can win people around. So they don't see it as a challenge to them. They see it as an opportunity to do better.
Yeah, and just building on that, I mean, the one thing for me in all of this is involve the public, trust them, engage, build transparency, engage. I've just done a piece of work with some local authorities about cash offices with COVID. They've been shut for 8 months and they're coming to the right solution, which is I'm not opening them again. There's a thing called PayPoint. There's another thing. You know, there is no reason to continue with that old kind of work. The reason they've got to that conclusion was they asked the public. Radical concept, but you know, quite often they know as well as we do, if not better. And the simplicity of the answer that comes back is refreshing, and does challenge head on quite often a lot of assumption-based policy thinking and entrenched belief that you get within the machine. So, you know, and I think the cornerstone of everything that we do in digital is absolutely about trust and transparency. How are we going to achieve that unless we're much more proactive in our engagement with the very people we're here to serve?
So there's one question I want to come to about building capacity before we probably sort of call it a wrap, but we've got a question come in the Q&A from Andy. Thank you, Andy. So it deserves being read out in full because it's quite well written. Continuous delivery is the right approach to ensure things are maintained and evolved based on the conditions you find yourself in over time. Is there an issue arising where it's easier to fund development of new things than maintaining and developing existing things? Who wants to answer Andy's question?
Well,
Great, Philippa.
There's a short answer, which is yes. And I think, so one of the ways I think we need to tackle this is actually in really practical ways. And I think you probably heard earlier that we have tried to organise ourselves into product families, so groups of like a shared user group or shared tech stack, etc. And within that, what we're trying to do is provide a blend of new and continuous evolution. So, and with that, that kind of operating model, and it's obviously just a way of structuring ourselves, but we're able to balance some of that, some of those decisions that we need to make around funding the new, exciting, sexy stuff, and continuing to improve the existing products and services. And so far, the compelling rationale, the compelling argument is are things like evergreening and not having to, fund big new investments. It remains to be seen whether we can pull that off and whether we'll be able to continually invest and continually refresh these products and services. But I think we have to stop hiding it. We have to be more transparent and probably clearer in the advantages it will bring if we all do this.
Yeah, I think the reality in government is still 70-75% of all IT spend is locked up in existing stuff. That hasn't shifted massively, to my knowledge, maybe 4 or 5% if you're lucky. I think the challenge around it is how we unlock that, but unlock it in a sensible way, because what you can't do, and I love this when you see business cases, you can't go, I'll build this and I'll switch that off. It doesn't work like that. It kind of goes up and down again. Yeah, and there is a period where you end up with both for a little while. The tragedies when you don't, they're all over government. So I think that turning the question on its head, I think it is easier if the funding models say, here's invest to save over here, or transformation, or good, I'll bid for that, and then you ignore the current. The real story, I think, around this is how you transition out of existing in a sensible way and use investment sensibly to transition from that to the new state. And that's a really challenging business mindset in public sector. We still really struggle with that. On business cases, we're still wedded to our 5-year, DCFs and all that malarkey.
So if I may comment on that, our counterparts at the US Government Services Agency, which has now come to the fore a bit more than it had been, there's a program within there called 10X, which takes ideas from within, with staff, and in terms of how to redefine how they deliver services. And their model is very similar to our innovation model of increasingly large increments of investment. And actually what they're finding is that investment, a little bit of money to test a hypothesis, to then test whether the solution might be able to be solved, to then put in more investment to deliver a federal capability, is a model that is now recognized as a very effective way of testing. So there is that question of legacy versus new, and old versus shiny. But they find this as a methodology is great for building the evidence to say evidence, and also the more accurate costings, rather than going out with the specification, which is X, and then finding that 2 years down the line, actually you're paying X plus, and it's an effective organizational delivery mechanism. So there are models around the world that we should absolutely open our eyes to and see. And yes, we've been leaders on many fronts and many things, but there are other people doing just as effective, if not more effective stuff. And so it's good to have an open eye. And that's why certainly I enjoy the work of our program within the CivTech Alliance, is seeing how else people are doing it.
There's no doubt that you have something which has been around for a while, it becomes yesterday's news, and you can't get that momentum and interest in it. But the point of making transparent where there are new issues being discovered or new needs being identified within a particular service allows you to re-energize the focus and create a new problem, which all the things we talked about, everyone's talked about, the production of a hypothesis, the investment of a small amount of energy with the right mix of people, which then gives you a more predictable outcome for a predictable cost, which then allows you to determine if you need to take the next step. That whole approach, whilst bringing people across all the areas of the organizations that are affected, using evidence to refresh our understanding of existing things, is one way to keep continuous improvement, keep moving.
But there's a very simple technique that we can use, and anyone who's the service owner, thinking about their comms, our services are making lives better of thousands of people. We should make use of that and bring that to the fore, as any sort of comms oriented organization would. So, within the use of services, in order to keep things fresh, it's what are the use cases? Who are the people, the lives that we are improving? the flood rollout stuff has been around for 4 years, but we're always getting use cases of communities that have been saved by flooding, haven't required emergency services because the emergency services know that village is okay, they've gone somewhere else, and you're always using that good news story. So then you're then able to present brand sentiment analysis. So part of this is very much the transparency and the comms and the onus on you as a service delivery to keep you in the public eye or the minister's eye or whosever eye it is important to be kept in sight of. So there's a real comms element to it.
Yeah.
Well, my plan is to have one more question talking about capacity development. Have sadly run into the sand because we are now absolutely out of time. I'd keep talking, but my sort of colleague who's hosting the session is giving me sort of some sort of signal involving a line drawn across my throat. So I sense that's a bad thing. So I shall thank our panelists very, very much for the very free-flowing conversation. Thanks for the questions from the audience. Thanks for the comments about the baubles hanging in the background. I think I've explained myself there. But it's been a real pleasure, and obviously I look forward to seeing many of you in the next session, perhaps, of the conference. But for our panelists, thank you so much, and have a great day.
Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Yeah.